Welcome to Breaking the Couch, a weekly conversation demystifying what happens in and behind the therapy scene to support your healing journey. We are your hosts.
I'm Dr. Doughton, a licensed clinical professional counselor, a certified school psychologist, and a trauma specialist with Playfully Psyched.
And I'm Dr. Joe Harchi with Soft Art Psychology, a licensed clinical psychologist.
We're here aiming to provide you with mental health tools to address the cycle of generational trauma across the age span, from infancy and childhood to adulthood.
For more information, visit our Instagram page at Breaking the Couch or our website, breakingthecouch.com. While we hope you love listening to and learning from our podcast, it's not a substitute for a relationship with a licensed mental health professional.
So today, I think it'd be really, really great if we talked about what happens or what it looks like when people really want to engage in trauma therapy or trauma treatment, trauma intervention, but they're still in a traumatizing situation, or they're still with a partner that has harmed them or something along those lines. One of the things that comes to mind for me is that, so with hardcore traditional trauma intervention, right, what we learn is that the person needs to be out of the traumatic situation for the intervention to be helpful. That was I think the core of what they taught us years ago, or what I learned years ago, because the idea is that you're, rooting the person back into safety, right? And helping them realize that their environment is now safe, that their body is safe, their body's containing all these different things. But that's not quite true if they're still in a traumatizing situation or they're still with a person that has abused them. Now, this topic, though, came up several times when I worked in different agencies for Child Protective Services or Department of Child and Family Services, those departments, where we're thinking about a parent or caregiver or family member has abused the child. And so part of court order support and help is trauma intervention for the child and the family. And so we're doing these intensive trauma interventions with this child and or family, but the parent or caregiver has visitation rights, right? And so us trying to figure out how to navigate the fact that, well, the person that harmed them is their trigger, right? And they have visitation with them, or they see them. And one of the things that we found that could be helpful is when that other person would actually engage in treatment, right? So they could become viewed as a safer person. And the hard part is that, again, sometimes the abuser wouldn't want to engage in the treatment. They just wanted to do visitation. And so, we had to navigate that through the courts. But I think people can understand why that would be really challenging to start to believe that you're safe when the person, place, or thing that harmed you is right in front of you. It's like, well, am I really safe? Are you gaslighting me? Are you lying? What's happening here? No? Yeah.
Yeah, that's some of the same things that I was thinking. It was that old rule that a lot of us have been taught, that we don't provide therapy and we don't hold that space until, they don't say we withhold space, but they say that we don't have that therapeutic channel when the person's still kind of in their suffering. And I'm thinking the same thing, kind of when they would be still in an IPV, intimate partner violence, or a DV type of situation, that we would wait until they are removed from that person or that relationship and feeling safe and able to open up and talk. And I think the same thing. I think that there's a lot of complexities, and I'll just go ahead and say that I believe in the way that I practice is that, when patients will ask me, hey, let's say, for example, I'm trying to co-parent with this person, and, they're saying these activating things to the child, and it's not necessarily physical abuse, and it is emotional abuse, right?
Yeah.
What do I do? How do I, and I'm not going to say, don't come to me because you're still around this person. You've still got 10 more years or 15 more years or whatever with this person. And, I do believe that, and for some folks, I do believe that therapy can actually open a channel that they might not have been able to do because they're isolated from their communities, or they're feeling like they can't talk to certain family members. We've seen
Mhm.
that too.
Mhm.
So I've had the honor of working with some folks while they got out of something that was toxic or negative, and that's felt really great because then you see them sort of open up out of that isolation and get their connections, and then, yeah, access I would say, like, a different type of therapy
Mhm.
once they're away from the toxicity, um, but, I haven't necessarily done that with somebody who's in a physically abusive relationship. I
Mhm.
don't see how I couldn't, though. I think that somebody could still access therapy in those situations to help them kind of have that therapeutic connection and rapport and alliance, and hopefully open that channel of, "Hey,
Mhm.
okay, let me tell you this stuff if I can't tell my friend or family members or whatever."
Yeah, what you said just made me think of, like, somewhat the embedded hypocrisy in our field. Talks a lot about the Therapeutic Alliance and the power of it, and, like, we
Mhm,
know, from studies that the Therapeutic Alliance is, like, the biggest change agent most of the time in therapy, meaning it's not always the methodology or the intervention that you choose, whether it's EMDR or CBT or whatever. It's not always the actual intervention. It's the relationship you have with the therapist. So how do we say that Therapeutic Alliance is one of the biggest change agents, and then be like, oh, but if you're in trauma situation, the Therapeutic Alliance doesn't matter or isn't going to help you.
mhm,
You're going to stay in
mhm,
danger, and then you can come to therapy later. So I think it's a very interesting conundrum that they kind of set up with that initial rule. And I also, think about where the basis of that rule comes from, because it's really idealized, right? Like, it's not realistic in s- so many ways. I mean, think about the fact that, and I hate to always bring this back to race, but things come back to race, things come back to
mhm,
our
mhm.
discriminations, our the microaggressions, all those things. It would be like telling a Black person that you can't heal at all. There's no healing possible while racism still exists. So then you're telling us that we stay damaged, traumatized, hurt, whatever, for our life,
Wow.
right?
Yeah.
That is
Mhm,
ridiculous. Like, that's not true. And I love that you're bringing this in. Yeah, the Therapeutic Alliance, or the relationship that you could potentially build within um, trauma intervention, could be the method of change that the person needs to figure out how to get themselves safe, how to get out of that situation, um, or give them figure out resources to make the situation a little bit better. And then, right, the relationship or the intervention can change a bit to be more reflective and healing from that perspective. I also want to think about, you know, we can only do within the hour of therapy, that 50-minute session usually, what's within that space, right? Like, we aren't um,
yeah.
in the people in their lives 24/7. We're not going in with capes and, like, battling whatever they're
Right.
battling in their homes, right? And so I do think that there's still power in, building in mindfulness, building in some of the
Mhm.
trauma recovery strategies, emotion regulation strategies, to get you through those moments um, of fear and harm in your daily life, right? Because the brain is a beautiful thing, and we also know about disassociation, so, like, that out of body experience that people can have when they're experiencing something really scary or traumatic, and it's a protective factor, right? And so, and we typically want that to decrease over time when you're in recovery and healing from trauma. But when you're experiencing, it's like you get to choose, like, oh, I'm going to dissociate. At least it's not initially. You can build that as a skill if you need it. Um, but I just think that it's so important for people to understand that you can still have some level of healing even if you're still in a situation that is harmful. Um, your brain, your mind, your body are really powerful and can create inner strength and protection while you're kind of battling through hard things.
Absolutely. And I love that you bring up how our field perpetually sort of has this like, oh, come to us when you are in this ideal situation. But you're right. Like, why does, I'm not going to say why, but our field does this thing of excluding folks, right? So don't come to us if you're in the middle of your racism and other traumas.
Mhm.
What? Why
Mhm.
does okay, not why. Our field does that over and over and over again, and that excluding people, is, like you said, hypocritical and, like, I think an abuse, another abuse, another aggression, to say, "Hey, we're gonna have unconditional positive regard, except if you're using, or except if you're in a, situation that's, toxic,"
Mhm.
So, that's a very unfortunate part of mental health, and I actually love working with folks where they've been to a few therapists, and I'm kinda like one of their last stops, like, "Hey, I'm
Mm.
gonna try this again," because these other therapists have not felt like, they were really doing that whole thing of bringing me in. They actually felt
Mhm.
like they were asking me to leave until I'm ready, and they're like, "I am ready. I'm looking for therapy."
Mhm.
So, those are actually some of my favorite, stories. Mhm.
Mhm. Mhm. I think that brings up a good point about what is the word? I'm losing the word, but when we as a field, when we'll say like they are non-compliance, right? Where they're not
It's our
compliant to
favorite,
treatment.
yeah.
Yeah. And it's us are like layering through. Well, they're showing up to session
Right,
every single time,
right.
right? That to me says they want support, help, and healing, right? So maybe the non-compliance is really based on your approach, like how you're looking at the situation, how you're treating them. It doesn't have anything to do with them not wanting to heal, get better, what have you, right? And I think that goes up in the same lines of like, well, like you said, if you're using, well, no, you can't come to treatment because you're still using. And it's like, well, it's not going to be an effective treatment if you're coming while you are actually high at that moment, right? And so
Sure,
that's not going to
sure.
be effective because your mind state is altered. Um, but you don't have to be in like addictions recovery to start
Mhm.
treatment and get and benefit from it. Um, that's a really great point. It's a really good point.
Yeah, I have a million other offshoots of that, like, so then also if we're creating that connection, isn't that the antidote to a lot of sufferings, right? So if we're creating that therapeutic connection, I see kind of, what seems to be an agreement, so it's like, then we could create that rapport, that connection, and
Mhm.
maybe your protectors won't have to be, your firefighters, your protectors won't have to be fighting all the fires, managing what's going on inside, protecting you from this or that feeling or this or that experience as much. Maybe.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Maybe, right? Exactly. Um it's worth the effort to try if you're able to, right? Um and bringing that to the therapist. So being able to say, I think that sometimes there's this big cloak on our field. There's this big like there's some, mystery to it, which is one of the reasons why we have these episodes every week to peel back some of those layers, remove some of that cloak each time. And I think sometimes people aren't feeling safe enough to disclose that they're still in these active situations,
Mhm.
um, and or don't know if they're allowed to, or have already been told before, like, we can't do anything for you. Maybe not that harshly, hopefully, but we can't do anything for you until you leave that person, until you're out of that relationship, until um, XYZ. And so then they don't say, you know, they like talk vaguely, or they talk about a past relationship, or they talk about something else. And then we were all wondering, like, well, what's missing? Something's not working, something's not helping. And so I think that's really important for people to know, like, yes, you know, figure out a way to feel safe with your therapist or with whomever you're talking with. But that layer of honesty can be really helpful in saying, like, I know that this is not ideal, that I'm still in the situation, or, but I also don't have another choice right now. Because we can't pretend like, whatever the situation is, we can't pretend like it's always easy or even possible to get away right then and there. Right? There's like financial barriers, there's transportation, there's all these different
Mhm.
barriers. There's life, again, like we go look at racism, if we look at, transphobia, if we look at gender, like all these different things, you can't escape some of the traumas that you're going to experience just by existing, depending on the body you live in. So, how dare anyone
Mhm.
say that trauma recovery isn't possible simply because you exist? That's how I look at it.
I'm really happy that that's the message that we're putting out there with this episode.
Mhm,
And my last point for today will be around the fact that, if somebody is kind of, I guess, in the one of these like suffering situations and they do get a chance to connect with us and they're not super sure if they can have that honesty and transparency,
mhm,
one situation is coming to mind where it made me very grateful that the person felt that they could ask me this. They were like, "Hey, you know what? Um, I want to tell you about something that happened at home, but I do remember that you had shared with me your limits of confidentiality. Can you review that with me?" And I was like,
hmm,
"Thank you for putting that out there. Clearly, I will say what I can and cannot keep private again."
mm,
And I reviewed that with them, and they felt that they could tell me what they needed to tell me
mhm.
and so on. But, I also just wanna put that out there. I'm sure that's a little taboo to be saying, but, I know you and I have talked about that, as far as, I just appreciated that that person trusted me to say, "Hey, let me just ask you this one more time to make sure that I can absolutely feel I can trust you to tell you this." So
Yeah, I'm curious. I'm grateful that patient was able to do that too. But I'm curious, what do you mean you thought it was taboo?
right. So, okay. So my thought on that would be like, I think sometimes people will just kind of, from what I've heard, review confidentiality really quickly and not give like a lot of the details of like what they do and do not have to report in a certain state within those ethics and laws.
Mm,
Um, and so I'm gonna validate whatever suffering they've been through,
mhm,
but there are a couple of things that I would have to report, and so, like, I kinda outline those, and I don't know that I guess what I felt was taboo was that I don't know that everybody says, "Here are the things that I do have to say." I
mhm.
think we kinda just do a general sweep for the most part.
Gotcha. Well, I don't wanna go into too much detail, but I'd be curious. I think the listeners will wanna know what are some of the general limits of confidentiality. I think that could be really great in this topic if you're comfortable sharing that.
Oh, that's a great point. So I'm licensed in Florida and California. So I
Mhm,
see something along the lines of depending on where I'm at and who I'm working with, I do say something along the lines of, that they can talk with me about anything.
mhm,
That I do write a really brief sort of summary about what they talk about. They have access to that at any given point through
mm,
their medical record. They just log into their little portal. They could see everything that was written.
mhm,
Anything that I'm talking about in those notes is something they know I'm saying. I'm
mhm,
not putting something crazy in there that's gonna scare or surprise them.
mhm,
Um, and, the only times I would ever come outside of our talks and share that with somebody would be if, there was somebody under the age of 18 now or in the past who had been sexually or physically abused.
mhm,
In the state of California, we don't actually report emotional abuse,
mm,
but like I said, I certainly validate that that was abuse, and
mhm,
then I do mention that, with elderly people and people with disabilities, I do break our confidentiality and report those.
mhm,
And then I share that if somebody tells me, not in a joking way, right? Like we all have those days, but in a serious way that they do wanna kill someone, I do have to break our privacy and share that. And then
Mhm.
if somebody were to subpoena me to court, I can't promise that I'd be able to keep everything confidential there. And then when somebody tells me that they are planning to kill themselves, 9 times out of 10, I'm not telling anybody. That's
Mhm.
message that I hold gently and kindly and compassionately, and I'm grateful that they told me. But there are a couple times where I will have to call, like, a hospital or help them to be hospitalized and break
Mhm.
privacy there. So that's kind of the confidentiality breakdown.
Yeah, I mean, that's really great. I think thank you for sharing that with our listeners. Mine is very similar. I think the only thing I add or maybe
Mhm.
say differently or whatever is I let them know if I'm going to have to break confidentiality. And
Right.
if it's for
Mhm.
something that they can self report. So, in theory, um, self reporting is supposed to be gentler, and when you think about the system, than someone reporting on you. So that's whether that's, suicidality, whether that's elder abuse, whether that's child abuse, right? The idea is if you kind of turn yourself in or ask for help or support, then it's going to be a better outcome for you and the people involved in the situation. I say that I couch that in supposed to be or what it's supposed to look like because unfortunately I have worked in like again CPS, DCFS in cases where someone self-reported with support of another person and unfortunately, you know, due to racism, due to gender bias, due to all these different things, the outcome was probably worse than if someone had called on their behalf. So it does vary, but in general, the hope is that if you can make the call together or do self-report, then um, it's looked at as you're seeking for help, right? So that's the only thing. I tell people that even if I have to call, there's no reason why I can't let you know that. Right. And we're going to talk about it. And I, even with like suicidality, I say, you're going to have the opportunity to we're going to walk through this together. Right. I'm not going to be like, oh, you said this thing and okay, I'm calling right now and I'm going to go. No, no, no. We're going to make sure that you understand what's going on and that it's really the best thing for you at that time. So we're going to make that decision together too. Yeah.
Yeah, I really like how you word that too. I hope that we haven't thoroughly scared folks and that we actually let people know that there is more expansiveness than this old school rule of don't come to therapy if you're still in something tense or toxic or even abusive,
Mhm.
because we do we can kind of open our minds and our hearts and our therapy practices to know that the therapeutic rapport can be so healing and so
Mhm.
corrective for folks. So that's all for me today. Yeah.
Absolutely. And so for me, my spiel is always, that we want people engaged in this conversation, what questions you have, what thoughts are coming up for you when you're listening, when you're watching this. So please feel free to leave comments on YouTube, tag us on Instagram at Breaking the Couch. You can check out our website, breakingthecouch.com. And on there, there's a little form you could fill out. It could be totally anonymous, or you can let us know your name, leave us a comment. And you can also leave voicemails for people who, if that's still a thing and people still like to do, but you can leave a voicemail and then we can actually, if you wanted, we can put you on the podcast. We can add your question directly in with your voice and you can kind of hear yourself and share that with, family, friends, whomever you want to share that with. But get engaged. Follow us on the different platforms. Make sure you subscribe so you get those alerts. And there's a bookshop. So anytime we mention a book in our podcast, we add it to the bookshop. And that bookshop helps with two things. It helps support local bookstores because we know that there's some bigger companies that have uh, unfortunately caused little smaller stores to go out of business. And so we're trying to help some of those local bookstores. But then also we get a really small percentage of books that are sold through our bookshop, which really helps us do these podcast episodes because, it takes time and money to produce these things. And we just want to be able to continue doing that. Feel free to follow us on those platforms. And we're really looking forward to talking and seeing you all soon.
If you are looking for a therapist for yourself or your child, you can visit our websites, playfullypsych.com or softheartpsychology.com.
We appreciate you joining us this week and can't wait till there's another opportunity to jump on the couch with you next week.